Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here today. I'm Whitney Daly. I do marketing, research, and insights for Porter Novelli. And Porter Novelli believes in the art of communication to advance society. And I have dedicated my career to helping brands lead with responsible action because I believe in the power of business to make change, but I also believe in holding people, organizations, and institutions accountable. And so today, we're going to talk about the business of cancel culture. And in recent years, we've seen celebrities, authors, politicians, companies, organizations of all shapes and sizes be canceled in the court of public opinion. And while this concept of canceling an entity is filling our news feeds today, it's still a relatively new phenomenon. We started seeing it show up in the social media scene in 2016, 2017, with particularly on Black Twitter, and it has quickly become a tool used to express disappointment, dismay, even anger. But I'll pause there because cancel culture is different than a boycott, right? With cancel culture, we're talking about the social media, the online conversation, the chatter around an entity. The New York Times in 2018 called this a cultural boycott. And that's pretty powerful. And that's what we're going to dive into today is the mechanics of one iteration of this world of cancel culture. We'll unpack corporate cancel culture. And this is an important conversation because no company is perfect, but every company must be prepared for backlash. No organization has a pristine track record, but some would probably hide that fact, I think. Some executives are, they have their provided very guardrailed script from their PR team and they go off track. Perhaps a very well-intentioned statement doesn't quite cut it in the court of public opinion among watchful eyes. And other times a brand will just, wow, did they really just do that? That's what we're going to explore today. So I'm going to be sharing the results from a hot off the presses study launching this week. We took a two-pronged approach to this research, first issuing an online study of 1,000 demographically representative Americans to understand individual feelings on this topic. And then we overlaid that by examining 5 instances of companies that found themselves in a cancellation situation in 2020. We've pulled a year's worth of social media chatter, as well as specific relevant hashtags around each brand to understand the impact that cancel culture had in terms of volume, length, sentiment of this conversation. So today I'll share a bit of the data and we'll dive into 2 examples of our social set. So when I look at the data on this slide, I think about how just say maybe 10, 15 years ago, a company may have had one Greenpeace activist scale their walls, and that company would have weeks, maybe even months to respond, develop a plan, a strategy, a comms plan. But now social media has given individuals a voice, and that information can spread like wildfire. In fact, 2/3 of individuals think social media has given them a conduit to influence companies, and nearly 3/4 feel more empowered than ever before to share their thoughts about companies. And I saw a recent image on Instagram that really resonated with me. It showed the word cancellation with an X through it. And below it was written the word accountability. And I think that's what this really is. Cancel culture is a way for individuals to hold companies accountable in a way that they just weren't able to do previously. They think it's a good way to get that company's attention. And further, they think it can be an effective way at actually changing what that company is doing. And they think that executives in particular need to take responsibility for their words and their statements. So why are individuals canceling brands? The top reason is for that company to change its ways. This is about constructive feedback for brands to move to a better place, or at least learn some harsh lessons. But I'll also flag the top second response we saw here around corporate political involvement or stances, which of course unfolded in the early days of 2021. Here in the United States, we saw many companies try and distance themselves from Republicans involved in the insurrection at the US Capitol. And some companies, like Hallmark, went as far as to request political contributions to be returned. But I'll note that among the many responses on why someone would cancel a brand, only 14% said because they wanted that company to go away completely. This is not about obsolescence, it's about improvement. So what does a cancellation look like in practice, and how long would individuals be committed to canceling a brand? Just over a third of consumers, 34% in total, said they'd cancel a brand for a year or less. 14% said, yeah, they'd cancel a brand more for the long term, stopping support for a year or more. But for nearly a quarter, 23% of individuals, they believe cancellation is permanent. This portion of the population would just never support this company again. But the varying lengths of the commitment to a cancellation again reflect there's no hard and fast rules when it comes to canceling a brand. But I think this also alludes to the fact that different types of grievances can impact the severity, the length of that conversation and the cancellation. But as I mentioned earlier, no company is immune. Even the most well-loved brands can be canceled. 2/3 of respondents said they'd still cancel a brand, even if they love that company's products or services. So a warning to all of us out there. And although cancel culture has certainly been all over media and news feeds today, individuals are still divided about whether it's actually good or bad for society. While a third think, yeah, it's good, and it gets companies to recognize bad behavior, 20% think it's bad, and that punishment is just distributed a little too quick and a little too often. Still, 30% say, yes, it's effective, but it's overused. So now that we have a little of the lay of the land here, let's dive into some quick case studies. First up, we have Goya. Many of you remember in July 2020 when Goya president Robert Inanu praised President Trump and his leadership. This is bringing the company into a very political conversation, and a divided one at that, angering longtime Goya fans and energizing others. This also spurred counter boycotts and boycotts across the country. So let's dive into some of the findings. Although online conversation around Goya has been historically pretty limited, the cult brand enjoyed a baseline of positive conversation. Yet following Inanu's statement, Goya exploded onto the social media scene with a massive spike in brand mentions in July. And although by early August, the conversation spike ebbed quite quickly, the impact to the overall conversation around Goya has persisted, with chatter around the brand staying consistently negative since the statement and even continuing today. So what can we learn from this? Goya decided to stand by its statement and wait it out, if you will, but without taking that remedying step, such as kind of explaining that comment further or even disavowing this executive, Goya's perception in social media has continued to suffer. Next up, let's examine L'Oréal Paris. So following the lead of many brands in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, L'Oréal Paris issued its own statement of support to the Black Lives Matter movement. But they were immediately called out and accused of gaslighting by trans model Monroe Bergdorf, who was fired by L'Oréal after she spoke out against racism surrounding the violence in Charlottesville in 2017. So let's dive into what happened in chatter on social. L'Oréal enjoyed steady conversation throughout the year. You see this first spike at the beginning of the first chart, which was attributed to an announcement of Jackson Wang becoming a global ambassador for L'Oreal's skincare line for men. But the second major spike that you see here occurred following Bergdorf's statement and criticism of the brand. And this is causing an increase in overall conversation for L'Oreal, but a drop in sentiment. So conversation and sentiment did fall back to baseline by early August, as you see on these graphs. And this is because of steps L'Oreal took, including issuing a public apology, rehiring Bergdorf, and asking her to sit on the brand's newly formed UK Diversity and Inclusion Board. So the insight here is within a week, L'Oreal took a number of mitigating steps to acknowledge, learn, and improve. And although the company does recognize, of course, it has a long journey to go on here, the initial steps helped to improve the overall conversation around the brand after that initial cancellation. So what can we learn from this data, the case studies, and perhaps most importantly, what can we take away so that you know if your company finds itself in a cancellation conversation, what you can do next? We found a number of immediate actions a brand could take to mitigate the situation. And as you see here, most individuals cite a public statement of apology as a good first step a brand can take, that or clarifying the situation, pulling back the curtain to share a bit more about why your company took that specific action or made that statement. But also important is subsequent action. And my colleague, Sean Smith, who leads our corporate reputation and crisis team, said this is often the hardest part for brands because it must be sustained and individuals will be looking to see the progress that you've made. I'll also flag that a third of individuals believe to get beyond the cancellation, a company must fire the person responsible for making that offensive statement or policy. So this is a big warning to executives. Be careful what you say and what you do, both inside and outside of the office. Finally, I'll close with saying that, while no brand is immune to being canceled, some fare better than others. And especially those organizations that have a deeply rooted purpose, values they can stand by in uncertain or uncomfortable times, a loyal fan base and employee base that's energized about the brand and what they stand for. I cannot underscore this enough. And of course, in order to gain forgiveness in the court of public opinion, change must be real, and it must be substantive, and it must be ongoing. Cancel culture doesn't seem to be going away. So it's probably a good time to take a look at your programs, your policies, your actions as an organization, and especially your values in case a cancel does come your way. Thank you.